My husband proudly walked into the living room holding newborn twins, smiling as if he had won the lottery. My mother-in-law took one look at the babies, turned pale as a ghost, and screamed in pure terror. Little did they know, I had already transferred all $42 million of the family assets into my personal account. Before we begin, dear friends, please help me. Your subscription is very valuable to me. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. 10 years of marriage can change a person. For 10 long years, David and I lived in a beautiful 3-story home in the suburbs. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. David was a successful real estate developer, and I ran my own digital marketing agency. We had wealth, status, and a beautiful home. But behind closed doors, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. We did not have children. In the beginning, David was supportive. He held my hand through every failed doctor visit. But as the years passed, his warmth turned into cold resentment. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, made sure I never forgot my failure. Every family dinner became a trial. She would drop subtle comments about family legacies and empty nurseries. I swallowed my pride and endured it all because I loved David. I thought he was suffering just as much as I was. I thought our pain was shared. I was completely wrong. The turning point happened on a Tuesday evening. David smelled like a strange, overly sweet vanilla perfume. It was not the expensive French perfume I always wore. It was cheap, tacky, and instantly recognizable. It was the exact brand my younger sister, Chloe, always used. Chloe was 24, irresponsible, and constantly asking us for money. I had helped her pay off her credit card debts 3 times over. I never suspected a thing that night. I just thought David had stopped by her apartment to drop off some paperwork. But then, the secret financial shifts began. I noticed odd transactions in our joint corporate account. $200,000 vanished under the guise of an undisclosed land investment. A week later, another $50,000 was transferred to a private clinic in another state. I did not confront David. An icy clarity washed over me. I quietly hired a private investigator named Marcus. It cost me $15,000 upfront, but it was worth every penny. 2 weeks later, Marcus sent a digital file to my private email. I opened it at midnight while David was sleeping soundly beside me. The file contained medical records, legal contracts, and photographs. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My husband had signed a secret surrogacy contract. But he had not used an anonymous donor. He had used my own sister, Chloe. They had been sleeping together for over a year behind my back. Chloe was pregnant with twins. David had promised her $5 million and our house once he divorced me completely. The realization did not make me scream. It made me entirely cold. I sat at my mahogany desk, looking at the photos of David holding Chloe's hand outside the premium fertility clinic. The receipt showed a wire transfer of $250,000 from our corporate account directly to her personal savings. He was using the money I helped build to fund a betrayal with my own flesh and blood. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly still. My heart rate did not even spike. Instead, a beautiful, razor-sharp clarity washed over me. They wanted a family, and they wanted my wealth. I decided right then that they would get neither. The first thing I had to do was secure the assets. David thought he was a financial genius, but I managed the back-end structures of our joint holdings. Over the next 3 weeks, I initiated a series of quiet, legally airtight maneuvers. I uncovered a loophole in our corporate bylaws regarding the intellectual property of my digital marketing agency, which generated 60% of our combined revenue. I legally detached my agency from our joint holding firm, moving $12 million in active contracts to a newly formed entity registered solely in my name. Next, I looked into our real estate portfolio. David had recently used our joint funds to purchase a luxury apartment complex worth $18 million. The title deeds required both signatures for liquidation, but he had given me full power of attorney 3 years ago when he was hospitalized with a severe case of pneumonia. I utilized that power of attorney to transfer ownership of that property to a private offshore trust based in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary of that trust was entirely me. To ensure David suspected nothing, I continued to play the role of the grieving, infertile wife. I packed his lunch every morning, adding a pinch of his favorite organic sea salt to his roasted chicken. I kissed his cheek when he came home smelling like cheap vanilla perfume. I even smiled when my mother-in-law, Eleanor, called to tell me that she had found a new holistic specialist who could fix my broken body. I listened to her voice dripping with fake sympathy while looking at the digital dashboard of David's personal bank account, watching him withdraw another $30,000 for Chloe's private maternity suite. I knew Chloe was staying at a secluded estate just 2 hours outside the city. David had rented it for $12,000 a month using a credit card that was linked to my agency's rewards program. They were literally using my hard work to build their nest. But what David and Chloe did not realize was that Eleanor had her own deep, dark secrets. While digging through the family financial history to untangle our assets, my private investigator uncovered an old, sealed medical archive from 30 years ago. Eleanor had given up a child for adoption before she met David's father. This discovery changed the entire game board. Eleanor had a child out of wedlock 32 years ago, a boy she had abandoned at St. Jude's Medical Center. The records showed the biological father was from a prominent family she wanted to climb into, so she erased her past completely. But DNA does not lie. Marcus traced the adoption files and found that the baby boy had grown up in an orphanage 3 states away. That boy was adopted by a working-class family and named Arthur. Arthur grew up, struggled, and eventually had a daughter. That daughter was none other than my sister, Chloe. My stomach turned, but my mind remained absolutely icy. David was my husband. Chloe was my biological sister. But Chloe was actually Eleanor's biological granddaughter through the child she abandoned decades ago. David and Chloe were uncle and niece. The twins Chloe was carrying were the product of an illegal, horrific genetic entanglement. They had no idea. Eleanor had kept her secret so deeply buried that even her own son didn't know he had an older half-brother. I sat back in my chair, watching the digital clock click over to 2 a.m. I printed out every single document, the adoption certificates, the DNA matching profiles Marcus had verified through an online registry, and the hospital records from 32 years ago. I put them in a thick manila folder and locked it inside my hidden floor safe. The trap was set. Now, I just needed to finalize the financial destruction. I contacted my corporate attorney, a sharp man named Richard who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. I presented the evidence of David's embezzlement from our joint accounts. Over $280,000 had been funneled directly to Chloe's personal expenses and clinic bills. Richard smiled a cold, professional smile. Under our state law, hiding marital assets to fund an extramarital affair with a relative was grounds for immediate asset forfeiture. I instructed him to draft the divorce papers secretly. We did not file them yet. I wanted David to feel completely secure. I wanted him to think he was winning. For the next month, I watched Chloe's belly grow. She posted vague updates on her private social media accounts about a mystery benefactor who was changing her life. She posted a photo of a platinum bracelet from Tiffany & Company worth $14,000. The caption read, "Blessed by the best." I checked our credit card statements that exact afternoon. David had charged $14,200 to that exact jewelry boutique. I saved the receipt to our legal file. Every single dollar they spent was another nail in their coffin. 2 weeks before the due date, David told me he had to go out of town for a major real estate seminar in Chicago. He packed his premium Italian leather suitcase and kissed me on the forehead. "Have some rest, honey," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. I smiled and wished him a safe trip. The moment his silver Mercedes pulled out of our driveway, I got to work. I drove straight to Eleanor's suburban estate. She was sitting in her sunroom sipping premium Earl Grey tea when I walked in unannounced. I did not greet her. I placed the thick manila folder directly on her glass table. She looked up with an annoyed frown, asking what this was supposed to be. I told her to open it. When she pulled out the 30-year-old adoption file and saw her own signature from St. Jude's Medical Center, the teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Her face lost all its color. She began to tremble, stammering, trying to deny it. I didn't let her speak. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that her abandoned son, Arthur, was Chloe's biological father. I told her that David, her precious son, was currently at a private maternity clinic holding hands with Chloe, who was giving birth to his twins. Eleanor choked on her own breath. She gripped the edge of the table, realizing the horrific truth. Her son and her granddaughter were having children together. She looked at me in absolute horror, begging me to tell her it was a lie. I told her the truth was indisputable, and the babies would be home in 2 days. I stood up, left her drowning in her own guilt, and drove straight to my attorney's office. It was time to pull the financial trigger. We officially filed the divorce petition and froze every single asset. By utilizing the corporate restructuring and the offshore trust, I stripped David of his entire net worth. His corporate accounts were emptied legally. The $18 million luxury apartment complex was completely out of his reach. The 3-story marital home was registered solely in my name through an inheritance clause he had signed years ago. I left him with exactly $1,200 in an operational checking account, just enough to pay for Chloe's hospital discharge fee. 2 days later, the front door clicked open. David walked into the living room, holding the newborn twins in a plush blue blanket. He had a triumphant, arrogant smile on his face, believing he had finally secured his legacy and beaten me. Eleanor was already sitting on the sofa, looking like a hollow shell of a person. David walked up to her, beaming, and said, "Mother, look, your grandchildren are finally here." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes wide with deep psychological terror as she looked at the innocent babies. She looked at David, then at me standing calmly by the fireplace. She lost all control. She screamed in pure horror, "Stop, what have you done?" David froze, his smile completely vanishing. He asked his mother what was wrong, why she wasn't happy for him. That was the exact moment I stepped forward and handed him the frozen account notices and the DNA results. David stared at the documents in his hands, his knuckles turning white as he read the freezing orders from the state Supreme Court. He dropped the blue blanket slightly, his breath hitching as his eyes scanned the asset liquidation sheets showing a balance of exactly $1,200. He looked at me, his voice trembling as he asked what kind of sick joke this was supposed to be. I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed, watching his arrogance completely evaporate into pure panic. I told him it was no joke. I told him that every single asset, from the holding company to the luxury development projects, had been legally insulated and transferred away from his reach due to his marital fraud. He started to scream, dropping the papers onto the floor, claiming he would sue me and take half of everything because we built it together. I let him rage for a minute before pointing to the second document on the floor, the DNA matching profile from the orphanage records. Eleanor crawled over from the sofa, her hands shaking violently as she grabbed the paper and forced David to look at the name of Chloe's biological father, Arthur. David frowned, confused, asking who Arthur was and what this had to do with his children. Eleanor choked out the truth, her voice cracking as she confessed that Arthur was the son she had abandoned 32 years ago. The room went completely silent except for the soft crying of the newborn babies. David looked from his mother to the paper, his mind slowly piecing together the horrific reality. Chloe was his biological niece. The twins he was holding were the result of an accidental genetic nightmare. David dropped to his knees right there on the hardwood floor, the babies crying louder as his entire sense of reality collapsed. Just then, Chloe walked through the front door, wearing her $14,000 Tiffany bracelet and expecting a grand welcome. Instead, she walked into a crime scene of psychological destruction. She saw David on his knees, Eleanor weeping hysterically, and me standing there with complete coldness. I handed Chloe her own copy of the papers, along with an eviction notice for the luxury estate David had leased for her. I told her that her sugar daddy was completely broke and that her entire life was built on an incestuous lie. Chloe read the documents, her face draining of color as she looked at David, then at Eleanor, realizing she was completely ruined. She began to scream at David, throwing her designer purse at him, demanding to know where her $5 million was. David could not even look up. He was utterly broken, sitting in a house that no longer belonged to him, with $1,200 to his name, facing a massive public scandal, and tied forever to a biological nightmare. I walked past them without a single tear, picked up my coat, and walked out. David stood paralyzed as Chloe began packing her few remaining clothes into trash bags, shouting profanities at everyone in the room. Eleanor couldn't even look at her own son, burying her face in her hands, completely consumed by the shame of her exposed past. I didn't say another word to them. I stood tall, entirely unbothered by their desperate screams. I slowly picked up my car keys from the polished marble counter, smiled softly at their spectacular downfall, and walked away into a brand new future, leaving behind the utter wreckage of their greed. Within 3 months, the legal proceedings were entirely finalized. My attorney secured a total victory, leaving David with a mountain of legal fees and absolutely no path to claim a single penny of my businesses or properties. He and Chloe were left to deal with the public humiliation and the complicated reality of their situation completely on their own. I sold the suburban house shortly after, cutting every remaining tie to that toxic family line. With my $42 million completely secure, I moved across the country to a quiet coastal town. I bought a beautiful modern estate overlooking the blue ocean, where the air is clean and the silence is peaceful. My digital marketing agency continues to thrive, reaching new heights under my sole ownership. I finally have the tranquility I deserved for so many long years. I wake up every morning to the sound of crashing waves, completely free from the lies and betrayal that once defined my existence. Karma took care of the rest, and I am finally living my best life. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you would have done.